Now, what you should be doing to launch your creative tests is use Facebook's tool to run creative tests, which is dynamic creative. Now, I hear the feedback on dynamic creative all the time is, well, not every ad gets a fair shot, and all the spend goes to one creative, and they say that that's a problem. Well, the honest truth is that's a good thing. We just established how much of a bad idea it is to invest the majority of your budget on things that are liabilities to your relationship with Facebook. If instead you were able to say, I spent 80% of my budget on the thing that was good, instead of 80% of my budget on things that I ultimately turned off and didn't like, that's a much better relationship. When you work on and managing your investment, and you put the majority of your investment into assets that are desirable, that ultimately produce better business results for you and give you a better relationship with your partner, those are things that are ultimately good. So if you launch a dynamic creative test and 80% of the spend goes to one thing, that's awesome. That's actually a good thing. You don't need to test everything because spend in Facebook is a meritocracy. Where the spend goes is what ultimately is delivering the end Facebook user a positive experience. Now, our job is ultimately to say what gives the end Facebook user a positive experience and delivers us a projectable and desirable business objective. If we can use a dynamic creative and we run it for a week or 2 weeks, and we know, hey, give or take, every day's in and out, but every week I know this is basically going to come in at $40 or so. Great. If our goal is to come in under 50, that's a win. We can honestly look back at week over week trend data and say, I don't care that I'm unstable on a day-to-day basis with this, because I know that ultimately the output of this thing is good for me. And if it's not only good, but as good or better than the ads that I'm using in my control environment, hey, I can improve my control environment with extreme confidence. Now we have a system developed that ultimately just makes things better on a consistent basis. This will reduce our costs over time. You should be seeing your CPMs drop year over year. My CPMs this year are less than they were last year, less than they were the year before that. Your cost per acquisition should continue to come down, or they should be stabilized at below your target cost, and you should be able to increase budget because you're making ads that are better and better, that have a higher estimated action rate, so you can spend more money. Because remember, what you pay in the auction, your bid, what they charge you, what Facebook charges you for a conversion is a very simple math equation. It's budget times estimated action rate and advertiser score. Now, when you were running a bunch of ABO testing against every single post ID, you were doing two things. A, you were making a worse estimated action rate for your entire ad account, and you were reducing your advertiser score because you were spending more and more money on things that were a liability to Facebook. So not only was each ad having to struggle on its own with very little spend, also, every loser that you had actually made every winner harder to be successful. So you were creating the system that ultimately worked against yourself. And the only way you can overcome that is by working harder, spending more money, and accepting a worse outcome as acceptable. So one of these is objectively better than the other. And the honest truth is there is no data-based and business result-based argument to say that running ads in an ABO by launching a bunch of tests so that every ad gets the same amount of spend and you can make a qualified impression and decision yourself is better than using dynamic creative. That argument does not exist. And that's a stone cold fact and objective truth that we have to accept. Now, the problem with dynamic creative is there's a lot of options, and people often misuse dynamic creative because they were not taught how to do it properly. So I'm going to teach you that right now. One of the biggest things that I use for dynamic creative is what we call the 3-2-2 method. And what this means is we have 3 of one element, potentially creative, and we have 2 of the other 2. So we might have 3 creatives and 2 headlines and 2 primary text. Now, I hear you saying, well, I've got 20 things that I want to test. Fine, we'll get to that in a minute. But if you have more than 3 of any one of those options, and one thing gets all the spend, and the result is bad, do you know that that concept was bad? Do you know that that ad set was bad? Do you know that that test was a loser? Or was the thing that got all the spend a bad idea? Now, if you have 3, it's really easy because you remove that one thing that got all the spend and performance doesn't improve. Hey, you know objectively, move on to the next one. and the performance is good, hey, you don't have to wait through 10 different creatives to get there. So it makes the decision-making binary, extremely high confidence, and super simple. You can train a machine to do it. A monkey with 30 seconds of coffee and a little bit of a training on how to hit a button can do 90% of the job for you. And that's the kind of thing that you want. A idiot-proof, repeatable system and process to create success at scale with easily repeatable solutions. So the point here is, when we use the 3-2-2 method, we are able to understand and work our way through very simple tests. Now, honestly, if you have 3 creatives and 2 headlines and 2 primary texts, which, by the way, we don't test descriptions, we don't test CTAs, those are completely irrelevant and we do not need them. That's 12 total ads, right? That's 12 total possible iterations. Now, honestly, out of those 12 total, you could build them all yourself. You probably won't. When you go into the ad set and build them on in your ABO, you're probably picking and choosing the ones that you think make sense, not letting Facebook pick the one that ultimately gives the end user the best result. Instead of letting Facebook do the work for you, you're working extra hard to guess, and that is never going to work for you. At scale, that is always a losing argument. Now, there are some people that run creative shops that will disagree with that because they build very specific ads for very specific things. And the honest truth is, there is blinders put on when you are going into the situation saying, I'm building creative to look and feel a certain way. And when I get it that certain way, it works better than this. Well, yeah, it'll work better if you don't use dynamic creative testing properly and you don't set it up to be successful. Then you're putting the thumb on the scale to make sure that what you're doing is better. And we see this happen a lot, especially with agencies that make their own creative. That being said, what we can do with the 3-2-2 method is make it extremely easy. Binary choice. Is this dynamic creative projectable in its outcome? Yes or no? Is that projectable outcome good? Yes or no? And based on that, we can make some very simple decisions. If it's not projectable, we can decide to either let it continue to run, or we can say, hey, look, it's not projectable, but every outcome of it has been bad. I've run it for 10 days, 14 days, and I don't even know what's going to happen. Well, that is actually a projectable outcome. A lack of confidence and consistency and desirable result. Hey, I know that this test is so chaotic, I don't want to run it anymore. That's fine. Don't do that after 2 or 3 days, though. Let it run for 5, 7, 10, 14 days. Understand with trend analysis, working through a weekend or during the week. Don't launch your ads all on a Sunday and say by Friday, you know what's going to happen, because objectively that is going to set up more and more situations which amplify the problems that you're having. Let the data do the decision making, because Facebook's a machine learning platform that's ultimately designed based on trillions of data points for billions of users and going back over a decade on the vast majority of them, plus seeing every single transaction they've ever taken. Why would you not let that machine that is designed to maintain attention and has proven itself to be the #1 tool in the world at doing that? Why would you try to undermine that and ultimately make a decision yourself based off of incomplete data? Because we already are upset on the reporting that we're having, and ultimately trying to react to things that happened in the past and take guesses on small data sets, because you're spending a little bit of money in a lot of different places when you're running an ABO style test. So when we're running a 3-2-2 method style dynamic creative, ultimately we're able to say, is this projectable? Yes or no? Yes, it's projectable. Great. Is that good or bad? If it's good, great. Then we can go in and extract the post ID of the winning concept, put that with our winners, and move on to the next creative test. We can maybe be running 2 creative tests at once alongside winners, or in this case, a proving ground style campaign where all of our best post IDs are. This is actually the foundation of how I build ad accounts that run off of one campaign that can spend easily $1 million a year. I have some that are spending over $1 million a month that are not more complicated than this. Because ultimately, we are investing the vast majority of our resources into content that Facebook wants to see. And we are then saying, this is what you want to see. Is this good for me too? The answer is yes. Great. We're going to move forward with it. If the answer is no, great. We're going to move on. And we're going to continue to do this so that I'm continually producing more and more high confidence, high value assets that I can invest more and more into, because not only am I meeting Facebook's business objectives, because ultimately that's what we have to do here, but we also need to make sure that Facebook's business objective meets our own. So when we create content, we're not fighting the machine, but instead working with it. Now we're in a situation where we are going to be tremendously more successful and on the back of way less work. Now, how do we get the post ID from that winning ad? Well, it's really easy. Now, one of the biggest complaints I hear about dynamic creative is, well, I don't know all the posts. I can't see the performance. I break down by dynamic element, and I have no information. That's objectively wrong. You can see the spend by element. Great. What's getting 80% of the spend? If the outcome is good, that is the reason the outcome is good. If the outcome is bad, that is the reason the outcome is bad. Or if two things are getting 50-50, great. We can use that information when we ultimately look to the preview Facebook post with comments, because that's where we're going to find the post ID of all of the ads that we're running. So when we can hit share in the upper right-hand corner, and we hit share, and then it drops down to Facebook post with comments. We can go there, and you're going to see this ugly URL across the top. It says DCO this, question mark that. Great. But you're going to see in order the ads in the order that they have of estimated action rate. What ads are most desirable for Facebook's bottom line? We can see those ads, what headlines they have, what creatives they have, what primary text they have, and we can then reference back to the spend that we had by dynamic creative element and say, wow, this one has the creative that spent the most, the headline that spent the most, and the primary text was about 50-50. Great. That's an ad that we know is probably responsible for a lot of the outcome of that test. And if we like the outcome of that test, why not take the thing that probably spent the most, that is the highest contributor to that good success, that's probably doing a lot better than the average? Because remember, there are a few bad ideas in there that are keeping that average higher than it should be when we're talking about efficiency. And we can hit the timestamp on that ad where it says created by you on so-and-so date. And when you hit that timestamp, you're going to notice the URL changes. And now you're going to get the post IDs, all of the letters and numbers that come in after the last little slash that we have at the end of that URL. Now, when we look there, we can take that, we can make an ad, we say use existing post, we copy, paste it in there, boom. Now we're promoting the post that's the winner of the dynamic creative test, and we can move right along. Now, you can repeat this process once a week. I don't think you should put it on a timeline, though. Put it on the element of, do I have confidence in the outcome of this test? Do I objectively know where this will end? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. And if it's good and yes, take that post ID, put it alongside your other winning ideas, and then ultimately you've got a system for repeatable success that is only making every ad that you are ultimately spending the majority of your budget on better and better. Now, if you use this inside of a CBO campaign at broad, which is what you should be doing, now your winners are competing for spend against your tests, which means your tests have to not only win in the test, but they have to compete against the winners. Now, I've gone into extreme length before about why running a test campaign and a scaling campaign is a terrible idea, because it completely breaks up the scientific method, and there people are successful at that. But again, that's because their business is so good they can do a bad job at Facebook, or their definition of success isn't actually a business objective one, but instead a misinformed, myopic one. When you're running your test and it has to compete with existing winners, and it wins, your confidence is extremely high. And we want to make sure that we have extremely high confidence so that we can invest in super high value assets, so we can continue to make every choice that Facebook does on our behalf better and better. And that's the real choice, because we are the manager, they are the employee. We have to give the system higher value assets to make decisions on our behalf.